So here we are. It's Sunday, the 17th of September, 2017. We're having our third session of oral history with Ria at her lovely apartment at the Dunfield. And you were saying that you had some topics in mind that you wanted to talk about.
That's right. Now this one that I can remember very clearly was very gratifying. This one was because of Aunt Dorothy about 15 years ago said to me, I want you to do whatever you can to get Zadie's poetry into the Toronto Museum.
Jewish Museum.
That's right, the Toronto Jewish Museum, correct. And she was very determined.
Yeah.
I said to her, but you know, Aunt Dorothy, well, I used to say Dorothy, okay, you know, Dorothy, that I've had Jewish experts who could read it in Yiddish, and they said, it's terrible poetry. And one of them said to me, don't waste your money trying to get it translated, because it's awful.
I remember that, and I remember being very offended.
Right.
Very offended.
Exactly, yeah. Which is what Aunt Dorothy felt too. I was more inclined to be practical about this and say, you and my mother are going to spend money to get a person of some skill, I suppose, in Yiddish, to take a look at it and then come up with a decision. Well, yes, that's exactly what was going to happen. Even though the man that I had hired was fully qualified and advised against spending any more money on this. Forget it. And Dorothy was determined this time. And so that's what happened. I phoned the people at the shul and told them about this. And this is a person who's the head of that part of the what do I say? I guess the museum. And she said, who are you? I told her. And she said, this is, what is this you're calling about? Okay. I told her the story about Aunt Dorothy and her father who wrote poetry. Well, she says, I'm not Jewish, so I don't read. I can't read anything in Jewish. It means anything to me. And you say that one of the experts said it's not good poetry. Well, I'm not interested for the museum to bring in anything like that. So I said to her, look, my aunt is determined. She's a very old woman, and we have watched my grandfather produce all these pieces of what we think is good. It must be good, even though it's been submitted to a company in New York City who turned it down flat, sent it back saying, don't send me anything like this. And that was good enough for most of us in the past few years. Well, the person I was talking to said, that's good enough for me, don't waste your time. But I persisted because Aunt Dorothy persisted. So I said, let me come and bring it to you. Well, she says, I don't read Yiddish. Well, I'm going to bring it anyway. It won't take you more than 5 minutes to look it over, and we can chat.
Wasn't there some English translations of it at that point in time?
Let me think. Yes, there were. The very man who said it's not worth anything said, I'll translate it for your family because you want your children to know what he wrote in his. Fine.
Okay.
So she saw that, and she said, I have to go with what the man said, who said it's not good poetry. She says, I'd be the laughing stock if I entered that in a show. And then she started flipping through the pages like this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Zadie wrote every day. He did a poem every day, and he read it to my grandmother, who usually laughed her head off. But as she's flipping, the young woman, as she's flipping through it, she says, wait a minute. He's got every page numbered. I said, yeah, he was very particular about putting just the way it was, and so he could flip it back and find what he wanted.
Right.
Now, this is during the war, incidentally.
Is it?
Yes.
He's still alive during the war.
Oh, yes, he was.
When he was writing.
Right.
Not when you're submitting this.
That's right. It was
Okay.
when he was writing.
Okay.
And he wrote, during the days of Hitler's war, they said.
Yeah.
That did it.
She liked it.
She loved it. Imagine having every day of that period on paper with messages.
Uh-huh. Ah,
She
Yeah.
couldn't resist.
okay.
She said, oh, this is something different. This,
Ah.
she said that with all the dates and the histories, and he did that every single day,
Wow.
just like he was a
Reporter.
yeah, that's right. And so she took it,
Lovely.
and I said to her, I'm glad that you can find some value for it. Would you please write a note to my aunt that you're accepting it and that it's going into, and she says, I'll be happy to do it.
Mm.
And she did.
Wow.
And Aunt Dorothy was ecstatic.
Isn't that
Isn't that a
terrific?
lovely
Yeah.
story? Now, I often wondered after that whether it's still in the
Archive.
archives. Thank you. And I once or twice I went down to the areas in the Jewish community where I know they have these what do you call it, exhibits.
Okay.
So I went down there. It wasn't too far from where I was living, about 10 days. No, what would it be? How long ago would it have been when I was living near?
St. Clair?
Yeah.
Well, you were living near St. Clair 3 years ago.
And before that?
And before that, you were living at Three Gardens Circle.
No. There were two places that I lived in after I left Three Gardens.
Well, the first one was 355 St. Clair
Right.
West, and the second one was Jakes Avenue.
That's right.
Jakes, both
That's
of
right.
them near St. Clair.
Right. So it's those are the addresses that I have in that. Anyway, the point is that it went in there. I've never checked since whether it's still in the archives.
I have a feeling that if we were to go, we could find it, because once an archive accepts something like that, it's usually a permanent.
Isn't that
acceptance. Yeah.
interesting? Then I'm
Yeah.
very happy.
Yeah.
And one of the things we can do is where I go, and you also go for your glasses? No, hearing
Yeah.
information. That street is where at least one of the exhibits.
Because the one place that I'm thinking of is the so-called Barbara Frum Library, which is in the vicinity
Oh.
of Bathurst and Lawrence. It's on a east-west street just north of Lawrence, west of Bathurst.
Yeah,
And that is, I thought that was like the Jewish community's library and archives.
I don't think so. It may be,
Okay,
but I'm not familiar with it that way.
okay.
It's because it's called, first of all, it was called the what? The library? The woman's name,
Well, Barbara Frum,
right.
yeah.
It's
and-
more because of the money that came in on her name
yeah.
at that exhibit, that they made it such an exhibit and called it the called it the Frum Library.
Well, I guess this is really not a question we need to work ourselves up about because
Right.
it's easy. We have good researchers in the family, and it'd be
Right.
I'll put Harriet on it to figure out where this material is deposited. And
Perfect.
it's a good story because I remember having a look at Zadie's the translation. Of course, you and Harriet could appreciate it in Yiddish.
In Yiddish, right.
But in the translation, it seemed very, pleasant and humorous, gently humorous,
Yes,
and
yes.
ironic. And I thought, this is maybe it's not great poetry, but it certainly is, readable. And it's our Zadie. so,
Yeah.
yeah.
All
Yeah.
you're saying is
Yeah.
true. All you're saying is true. Pardon me. And when
Right.
I was a little girl, I was living with Bubby and Zadie.
Yes.
And so I used to see him, and his handwriting was
Mhm.
beautiful.
Is that right?
It was beautiful, regardless. Of course, she didn't understand what she was looking at, except for that. but he had gorgeous handwriting. When I was a little kid, I used to go to camp.
Yes.
When I went to camp,
Uh-huh.
my grandmother wrote to me in Yiddish.
Yes.
And I would read it with great difficulty. She wrote rotten.
Same with Harriet's mother, by the way.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. So I wasn't excited about going to read Zadie's hand, but his was flawless.
And so much more readable.
Ah, absolutely, absolutely. A joy to read. So
Yeah.
I didn't want to upset Bubby by saying, the next time you write, get Zadie to write it and send it to me. But she knew. She said, I know, ich weiß.
So you've set me off on a train of thought, which is, where did the two of them, become literate and go to school, because education was so limited in the old country?
Good for you.
And then where did Zadie develop this beautiful handwriting?
Handwriting.
Yeah.
The closest I can come to that as an explanation is that Zadie came from a city, not from a
I
town.
see. Okay.
He came from the city of Minsk,
Of Minsk.
in the province of Minsk.
Mhm.
Now,
Right.
he was the youngest of a well-educated family
Interesting.
and his mother's favorite.
Okay.
And so they all, the seven of them, all got a thorough education. The father,
Yes.
like our great-grandfather,
Yes.
was an employee of the government
Oh,
of the city.
okay. Uh-huh.
So he wasn't just a beveman,
Right.
you know.
Uh-huh.
And
This
that
is great.
explains it. That explains it, Richard. He was a well-educated man, our Zadie,
Mhm.
as was everybody else in his family. And remember, when they came from the old country, they didn't come to Toronto.
No.
They came to Chicago,
Right.
where Zadie's oldest sister lived.
Right. So did the old Zadie, our Zadie's father come, or did he stay in the old country? And it was just his daughter, the oldest, and his son, the youngest, who came.
I don't know of anybody else in the family. Auntie Heike was Zadie's oldest sister.
Auntie
She's
Heike, okay.
Auntie Heike. And I don't know any other member of his family at all.
Ah, I know we've talked in previous sessions about this Chicago branch and how we lost contact with them, and how later years we tried with Aunt Dorothy, wanted us to try to track down some of these lost Borchets, and Borchet is such an unusual name.
Right.
I'm kind of curious, where does, where are the Borchets?
Yeah. It's an interesting question.
Yeah.
And it was very important to that generation. My uncle, Bobby's son's name was
Well, Bobby's son was Jack.
Jack.
Right. Our Uncle
yeah,
Jack.
he became very interested in following any clue
Really?
of that name. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
He even traced a musician in a traveling orchestra
Wow.
from Russia
Okay.
years later to our own city, where they had come to do a concert,
Okay.
and his name was Borchet.
Huh.
And my Uncle Jack actually phoned from here to Vancouver,
Uh-huh.
where they were performing, to speak to that man.
Huh.
And he did speak to him.
Interesting.
But between them, in the conversation, they could not find a connection with our
Right.
family. So Uncle Jack told us all what the results were and said, forget about it.
Ah, my recollection of that story, or a version of that story, is that the Russian musician in question was named, I think it was Rudolf Barshai.
That's
and
right.
he was the conductor of a symphony, and then he moved to Canada, and then he became the conductor of the Vancouver Symphony.
Oh.
And I remember Aunt Dorothy saying, Richard, you should look him up and see if he's a relative. But your
Interesting.
version of it has Uncle Jack 30 years earlier.
Right. And
Yeah.
and that's the way I remember it.
Yeah.
And I didn't know about the rest of it, that he actually settled in Canada. Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
So.
Or I didn't remember that.
So then here's Zadie, who came from what sounds like a middle-class Jewish family in the city of Minsk.
Right.
And then there's Bubby, who came, I always think of her as in the town of Borisov, which is a little town in the Minsker
They pronounce it.
region.
They pronounce
How do
it.
they pronounce it?
They actually pronounce it Borisov,
Borisov.
which is more. It sounds
More Russian.
That's
Borisov.
right, Borisov.
Borisov.
And it was a small town.
Yeah.
Now, how could she write? Interestingly enough, Bubby was the oldest
Okay.
of her family.
Yeah.
And so she was considered her father's right-hand man,
Okay.
okay? And she was that. She was with her father every single day for some time, later in his life when he was sickly and so on. And she lived on the same street in one of his houses
Yes.
with us. She went in every single day to do whatever he needed done, including writing, including cleaning his room
Uh-huh.
and so on. that was considered her job, even though she had two brothers younger than her. Now, I don't know why it ended up being that way, but Bubby was the one that did everything
For the old
Everything.
Zadie Soloway.
for the old Zadie Soloway.
And do you have a sense, because you must have been alive then, what year the old Zadie died?
I wish I did. I have a recollection because I was at the funeral. The funeral took place on College Street near Spadina.
Okay.
There was a, whatever we call it.
Funeral parlor.
Thank you. And I saw his funeral.
Mhm. Can you think of how old you were?
I would hazard a guess,
Uh-huh.
probably 12, 11.
So it could have
in
been the
there.
early 30s, something
Yes.
like that.
It could have been.
Right.
And we walked to the synagogue, not the synagogue,
The funeral
the
parlor.
funeral parlor on College, on the south side
Okay.
of College. And I saw the whole thing and I was fascinated by it because I joined in it. I don't even know if I was supposed to, but I was holding Bubby's hand
Yeah.
and I walked with everybody.
Wow.
She was very upset. She
Wow.
cried a lot, like
Wow.
our grandmother.
Wow.
And then interestingly enough, we walked only, it was funny, we walked from the funeral parlor what's the name?
Because there was a Jewish, now Chinese funeral parlor just north of College on the west side of Spadina.
We
Around the
marched to
circle.
that.
Oh, you did? Okay.
We walked from the one that was not on Spadina, but on
College, yes.
around the corner to the one you're talking about, which ended up being a Jewish.
Right.
Yeah.
But then where was the burial? Could we find the burial?
I don't know, because then the cars came out.
Uh-huh.
In other words, we walked over just around the corner
Right.
to what became a Jewish burial. Not a Jewish burial,
A funeral parlor?
a funeral parlor.
Right. Now, yeah, but I mean, it's an interesting question, because we do know where Bubby and Zadie are buried.
Right.
And we can find it.
Yes.
But I have no idea where the old Zadie would have been buried.
No, I have no idea
Yeah.
either. It's gone with them.
Yeah.
And I was just a kid, so I didn't even have any question
Sure.
about that.
So one of the things that I do remember about our Bubby and Zadie is that they used to go to the Minsker Farbund on Beverly Street. And when I remember that from my childhood, and I remember dropping Bubby off and on the west side of the street. And so that stuck in my
That's right.
mind.
That's right.
And then, is it the case that it was also a burial society?
Yes,
It was.
yes. it
Like
was.
the UJPO, for
Yes.
example.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
Because Jews were singled out with that curious thing that they always did, which was when they go to a new place, the first thing they do is buy a burial ground. And since they all did that with their societies,
Right.
their societies
Yeah.
bought the property first thing, and then they bought their burial grounds from them.
What's interesting, now that I'm thinking about it as a historian, of course, the Italians were famous and are famous for having their fraternal societies based on the region from Italy that they came from.
I didn't know that.
And so there's a similarity because the Minsker Verbund, appealed to people from that part of White Russia. And presumably there were other such societies. But then what we have today tends to be synagogues based on towns from like the Rodimer,
That's
from the
right.
Keltzer.
That's right. That's right. And based on the same issues.
Yeah,
They may not have been religious, so they didn't have but so their what do you call their organizations that they joined.
right. I would call them fraternal organizations.
Right. So
Or
if-
Landmannschaft or something like that.
Landsmann, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Landsmannschaft. So they did two things. They opened the sale of
Plots?
well, because, because the organization bought the lots,
Right,
or they bought the property and they made it into lots or
Right.
whatever. They did another thing.
yes.
They opened a savings society.
Okay. Uh-huh.
So, because those are the two major problems, to have a place that's Jewish and blessed and so on,
Yeah,
where you can be buried just in case you have an accident or whatever, was very important. But the next most important was to have money available to the members who may be in trouble, and Bubby and Zadie always were in trouble.
is that right?
Always.
And, you know, one of the terms that I've heard for that was revolving credit society, where you could pay in, you could pay out, you could repay, and then the money could be given on loan to another member, and you had
Yes.
to be a member, like a credit
The
union.
auction, it was called the auction.
Really?
The name, yeah, the name of these societies
Yes,
that had money to help Jews in a bad time, in a bad
Right.
day, or to purchase something
okay.
important like a house or something.
Isn't that great? And action,
An auction.
because isn't the Jewish word for stubbornness action?
It's a different
A
auction.
different-
It's
a different
true,
word.
it's true, but it's not pronounced quite
No,
the same
no.
way. Jews understand the difference. I don't know what your problem is.
Right, because I do remember when I was a kid and I didn't want to give up my toy or stop playing, my mother would say, "Oh, he's such an action."
That's right. I don't know what to do with him. He's an auction. But it's a different, it's
Yeah.
written differently and it's pronounced slightly differently.
So, coming back to Bubby and Zadie, you know, one of the ideas I had, and we're doing great, by the way.
Good.
One of the ideas I had was, now that we're approaching the high holiday period,
Yeah.
and, you know, our Bubby and Zadie were not religious.
No.
But I'm pretty sure that they would still observe, you know, familial occasions. Like,
Oh,
would
yeah.
would Bubby host a dinner? You know,
Oh, sure.
like a Rosh Hashanah dinner, for example.
She would, yeah.
And so, can you think of, you know, times, memories of those dinners? I can remember the living room, dining room at 10 Cameron Street, and then I still remember there's the kitchen and then the Zimmer kitchen.
That's right.
So, and must have been 5 or 6, you know, when
Yeah.
that was going on.
You got a great memory also.
But so, what would conjure up for posterity? What would you know, a dinner? How would it unfold at Bubby's table?
Well, it was, in my estimation, and I was very young, but I was very unhappy because
Yeah.
I knew how hard she worked.
Uh-huh.
She made everything by hand,
Right.
and it was delicious. It was all very good.
Good.
Zadie got himself into his best shirt and pants, and he was in his glory. He loved doing this because he was good at it. He would do the readings. What stayed in my mind, unfortunately, was how upset I was when the rest of the family went like this. They went, "Is it over yet?"
Oh.